You know, the reason that we came here was not to bring a message tonight. My 16-year-old Judah came with me, and he's in the booth right back there, standing in the booth, and he's carrying around a video camera. Now, if you think the video camera, you think that's for me, it's not. The reason we came here was to begin the works of a small documentary of your pastors. They've got a story that everybody needs to hear. And the people that hear that story need to hear about this amazing church because of all of you guys.
All right, my name is Erron Mercer. I'm from Wheeler, Texas. I've been pastoring here for about 20 years. We're fixing to hit our 21st year here in Wheeler.
I'm Sonia Mercer, married to Erron Mercer, who lives in Wheeler, Texas.
Growing up was great. I mean, I had great parents. Both my parents were great, fantastic parents. But being born with cerebral palsy, I spent lots of my early life, some of it I remember, some of it I don't, in hospitals, surgeries. When I was first born, what happened was I was born premature. And so I was underdeveloped, and it was a traumatic birth. Nobody was expecting it. We live in a rural area, so it was a little bit ways to the hospital. And so they ended up getting me out there. And I was in trouble. I was in the NICU, and during the process of all this, one of the nurses or someone at the hospital was going to give me a steroid to stimulate my lungs. Now they didn't know, because I did have some traumatic parts at the birth, so we don't know what's what. But the nurse or whoever gave me enough steroid that the doctor said would have knocked out a horse. And they told my parents, he won't make the night. He won't live. There's just no way. So say your goodbyes. He won't be here in the morning. Lo and behold, made the morning. And he said, I don't want to take this too far. We'll treat him as best we can, but there's no way he'll be a vegetable. We won't know the damage that has happened to him until, he grows and gets older. But he's going to have so much damage, he'll most likely be a vegetable. He won't ever know you. He'll never be able to speak. He'll never have any kind of quality of life. So it's best to start now planning how you're going to move forward, what you're going to do. And I had a praying grandpa, that just kind of prayed for me and asked the Lord to use me even before I even knew that I wanted the Lord to use me. My grandpa was praying for me, and everything worked out okay. And everything works good except for it's all muscular, and the brain damage part it has to do with all my motor skills. Every muscle in my body is affected by it in one way or another. It's mainly, though, my legs and my right side, my right arm, my right leg don't work quite as good as the rest of it. And if you see me walk around, you'll see that you probably think much of it works very good, but overall it works pretty good. So the Lord showed up and answered a lot of prayers to get me where I am today.
I didn't know that you had cerebral palsy when I first connected with you.
Yeah.
Because I'm watching videos online, church, and usually standing up front next to a table or some kind of podium or something. And I was like, then somehow I picked up on it, and I was like, wait a second, this guy, technically, according to the world, you're handicapped.
Right.
But you don't live like a handicap.
No, and that's thankful to my dad and my granddad, but mainly my dad was such a man's man, and he, for the most part, he's a man of integrity. So he never let me lean on a handicap. You know what I mean? I can remember one time we were sitting at a doctor, and I was 6 or something or 8 years old, and had been going through all this rehab, and the doctor says to my dad, well, you need to teach him to type, because he's never going to have the dexterity to write. Oh. So you're going to teach him to type. He's never going to be able to write, so don't even waste your time. And my dad, in the nicest way you can, you understand my dad, he even though he's a great man of integrity, he's a bouncer at a bar, he goes to Sturgis, he's a rough and tough guy. He's a big, intimidating guy, and he says, typewriter? He said, that's the stupidest thing I ever heard. He said, how's he going to carry around a typewriter? He's not going to be able to, he's going to take that everywhere he goes to write, sign his name, whatever. That's not going to work. And so he just never took the word of the doctor as the way it's going to be.
Right.
You know what I mean? And he had me doing pull-ups from as long as I can remember. You know, if I wanted to go up outside or whatever, there's a pull-up bar in my room, you know, in between my door. And I'd say, hey, can I go over to my friend's house? Yeah, go do 12 pull-ups, and you can go. And then I do 12, and I'd do, if he was around and was really watching me, and I tried to make it a habit. He'd go in, you do 5 going in, 5 going out, you know, and if he saw you go out the room, hey, you didn't do the pull-ups, go back and do your 5 pull-ups. So 5 going in, 5 going out. If you wanted to go do something, sleepover, yeah, you go do 20 pull-ups, you can go to the sleepover, whatever it is, you know.
Wow.
So he just wanted me to be as active and never let me lean on it at all, you know. You know, growing up and young, as I was young, I was really bullied big time, and you know, my dad would like, well, there's, you know, he'd basically say, you got to learn to deal with that. I can't be with you all the time, right? So he made me work through that and deal with all those things. And so I overcompensated my insecurity for this hyper confidence, you know. And so then that's why I turned into and so somebody might say something to me, they didn't mean it derogatory, because I'd been so bullied and stuff, I took everything as derogatory. So I was mean and nasty and, you know, acted like I didn't need anybody or want anybody. But for the most part, my dad taught me you got to stand on your own. You got to do your own thing. You can do whatever you want to do, you know. And a funny story about my dad, one time I was 18 years old, and I was coming back from Borger, and I might have been 19, and had a flat tire. And I had been running around with some friends in Borger, a little town where I grew up, and I had a flat tire, and it was 11 o'clock at night. I called my dad and woke him up, you know. I said, Dad, I got a flat tire. I can't get the lug nuts off. They're on there too tight. I need you to come help me. He said, who is this? And I said, Dad, this is Erron. I'm broke down over here on the side of the road. I need you to come help me. He says, Erron? He said, my 19-year-old son, Erron? I said, yes, sir. He said, click. And he just hung up the phone like, what do you want me to do about it? You're 19 years old. Fix your own tire. But luckily, you know, somebody came by and we got a pie. I figured it out. You know what I mean?
Right.
And that was his thing. I'm not always going to be here.
Yeah.
So you got to learn to do it. And so that gave me that confidence that I'll do whatever I have to do. I'll figure a way to do it.
Wow.
And you know, and I had a mom that was just the opposite of that. That's what balanced it all out, because my mom was the loving, and my dad was too. I mean, he wasn't ever nasty or mean, but he was serious about, it's going to be this way. You're going to do it, right? And so that's just how he was, and thank God he was. And he's like he said, he's just this intimidating force. Yeah. And I grew up, my grandpa had an oil business where he fixed oil wells, pulling units, and he'd fix these pump jacks that you see all out in this area. Mm-hmm. And so my first day on the job, I think I'm 16 years old, and my dad gets all the other hands that work on his crew together. So this is my son, Erron. He has cerebral palsy. But if I tell him to do something, he's going to do it. And if I see you help him do it, then I'm going to fire you.
Oh, wow.
I don't want you helping him. And so that's just how he is. That's how he rules. That's how he lives life. And so my job was, you take the front end of the pump jack off, the little pointy part that you see go up and down. You take that part off, and then you get in position to fix it. So he pulls that off and puts it down on the ground with this chain. And he tells me, hey, you pull that over here out of the way. Well, this thing weighs, I don't know how much. I don't know how much, 300-400 pounds this thing probably weighs. So I can't just grab it and pull it. So I have to get down on my knees and grab the sides of it and pull it. Then I back up and I grab it and pull it. And so it's taken me a long time. So I get 10 feet from where he wants me to pull this pump jack, and this other hand grabs the chain and just pulls it to 10 feet. And my dad literally fired the guy on the spot. Now, I think after a few days he gave him his job back, but that's the way he said, you can do it. Don't let anybody tell you can't do it. And then, you know, that's what I appreciate about it, even though my dad's a Christian, loves the Lord, but he's not, you know, he's not hyper-Christian, you might say. Yeah. But he had a lot of attributes of God. You can do it.
I laugh because you've got at least one guy in the church I know of that occasionally, depending on what's going on, like you guys were at Six Flags one time, I don't understand. Been there all day long. You're wearing out, but you're not complaining. You're going. But you're going slower. And I think he picked you up, right?
So we were at the Six Flags. We took all the youth to Six Flags. We got there when it opened. we stayed past close because there was a concert, Skillet concert,
Okay.
right? So I am burned down, and so I'm walking, and as I'm walking, I'm just falling, just just all the time, just every 30, 40, 50 steps, I'm falling on the ground. And James, he's this big guy like my dad, and he just, before I even barely get to the ground, he's got me back up on my feet, and I'm going again. And so after about the 10th time, I'm like, just leave me, man. Just leave me right here. Save yourself. No, I can't go on. You know what I mean? And but that's the whole thing. And the Lord has blessed me and put people around me in my life that, for whatever reason, they have a different trial, a different challenge, but they still have the same attitude. You know what I'm saying? And so that's been a blessing to me. There's times, that people aren't always thrilled with the pastor or whatever reason. So we got into a family situation. I had a gentleman that was very, very angry with me. And he was like seriously angry with me. And I was going to have a meeting with him to try to make the situation better, but I didn't feel comfortable going in there by myself. So I called James, and James is a big, intimidating guy. And I said, now, James, you got to come to this meeting with me because I don't know what this guy's going to do. He's very mad. I don't know what's going to happen. He says he's going, because he said that. He said, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to literally rip you limb from limb. He's going on. And so I'm telling James, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what's going to happen. And so James said, well, I don't know what's going to happen either. But he said, somebody might get killed, but it ain't going to be you. So anyway, so James has always had my back. And he and Natalie have been in the church. We were probably here a year or a year and a half. They started coming to the church, and he's always been a blessing to me.
That's incredible.
Just amazing.
So your dad obviously was a huge influence on you and your confidence and your stamina, all those things. Who's your biggest spiritual influence?
Oh gosh, I got so many. The one guy that probably was really responsible for me coming up in the Lord was a guy by the name of Frank Gordoa. He pastors a church in Grand Island, Nebraska. And so I started going I went to the Baptist church, and then we got into the youth group. Probably when I was about 12 years old, started going to the youth group, and old Frank came. It's back in the 80s, so he comes with this mullet, he has this mullet going on. He's got a V cut in the back of his hair, and he is a radical. And so he starts preaching, and he's coming to the youth because he's dating actually a young lady that I grew up with. My grandma and her grandma's best friends. And so I started just connecting with this Frank guy. And he was just so on fire for the Lord. And I never, even though I grew up in the church and it was all great, I never seen anybody radical for Jesus. Like going out and dragging crosses down Main Street and preaching the gospel. And I'm like, what is that about, right? And so he just began to take me under his wing. And I had various levels of mobility growing up, and sometimes I was in a wheelchair, sometimes I was in a walker, sometimes I had crutches, sometimes I was doing decent with maybe just some braces on or whatever. But he came and just took me under his wing, made sure I was at every youth meeting, made sure that everything. And that's when I was 14. I met him when I was probably 12. And I loved him so much I started dressing like him. I cut my hair in a mullet. and he was just my guy, right? And so he ended up coming and talking to my mom and saying, hey, I want to take Erron to this camp. At that time, I was very limited mobility-wise, couldn't hardly do anything on my own, crutches, braces, all at that time. And he said, no, I'll take him. And Frank at that time, I'm 14, Frank's 19. So you're talking about a 19-year-old kid. Yeah. 18-year-old kid taking me under his wing. We go to this camp. And that's where I met the Lord. And then I just stayed with Frank. Like he was a youth pastor, and then I just kind of stayed his right-hand man. Then he moved to Ireland, started a church there. I took the youth at that time after he moved to Ireland and was a youth pastor, children's pastor for a number of years. And then we've just stayed connected, all this time. We're still best friends to this day, even though he's more of a mentor and spiritual father. We're only 5-6 years of difference in age, but he's always been, a real influence in my life. Still today, yes.
Yeah. Tell me about when you met Erron, when you seen him for the first time.
Oh my gosh. That's so funny you asked that. Because when I first saw him, I walked in and it was a youth rally. This is where I'd meet that family. And I walk in and he's sitting on the front row and there's all these youth. And he is just funny by nature. And he's got all of these young people laughing. And then he gets up to walk away and he's walking the way he walks and he's got cerebral palsy. And I thought, he's making fun of mentally off people. And like I was instantly offended, like, who is this guy, you know?
Right.
And then, of course, after spending the weekend at this youth event, I realized who he was, and he was a man after God's heart. And here he is, he's 17, he's, young himself. But I remember leaving there, and I went home, and I told my mom, I tried to imitate the way he walks, and I said, Mom, is it all right to want to marry a guy like this? And so, as crazy as this is, I'm a 14-year-old girl, and I had a whiteboard, and I put, I love Erron, and so butchered his name because he don't spell it like most Errons does. And so I put, I love Erron, and I would tell everybody, I'm going to marry that man. And he didn't even know I existed at that point because honestly, that is not his first recollection of us meeting. He remembers a goth girl that, had all this black and emo and,
Yeah. So do you think that there was the God in him was a major attraction though to him?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And that was something you were longing for, and you've seen it.
Oh, yes.
In him.
Absolutely. I think, and you can't get around him without just that being who he is, and it just oozes out. And I was very much so attracted to that. And it was the thing, honestly, that even kind of catapulted me to, I got to study my Bible more so that I could have content to talk to him about. Because he was big into, if we can't talk about God, me and you can't date kind of thing. And so I knew I liked him,
Yeah. Tell me about the first time you met Sonia.
Well, that's a different story. It depends on, like she has a whole different story than me. Like,
We know her side.
yeah, so her side, I don't even remember. I don't even remember seeing her or her being there. And she saw me at a lock-in or some kind of youth event. I remember her for the very first time. We were doing a youth car wash. Mm-hmm. And she came to this car wash, and at that time, she was still living heathen and living with her mom in a really broken situation. And when I first met Sonia, she was wearing all black, Smashing Pumpkins t-shirt, had 6 earrings in each ear, with long earrings on the last one, long earrings hanging down, bangs, 12 inches in the air with you remember the 80s wings, I'm talking about the 80s wings. And so when I saw her, I was like, oh, Jesus, please. You got to get a hold of this girl. Oh. I don't know if anybody else in here needs Jesus, but that girl right there.
And you're talking about your future wife.
Yeah, I'm talking about my wife. And I'm like, this girl needs Jesus bad. Like,
right.
Do something with her, And that's how I remember meeting her, and I'm just like, ooh. Because, she was goth before goth was a thing. She invented it. She invented goth. She had the black eyelashes, man, and, she's pretty wide as far as skin complexion. So in the little small town of Borger, she showed up, and we're all like, oh, hello.
Yeah.
Lord, she just crawled out, wherever, because she was like tough. Like, she was like street smart, tough girl. And so for us to get together is like it's a God thing,
Right. Well, she left there that first time.
Yeah.
And said, I'm going to marry that man.
Yeah, that's the thing. And I didn't even know that till later,
Who in the world is this crazy thing? She needs Jesus, and she's like, I'm going to marry that man.
That's exactly right. So, and it's just, like you said, people put in place, what's the chances of her moving to where I am and us getting connected and her following the Lord. And she's, and that's crazy thing. Here she is, all this with this stuff. She's a much better Christian than I am still right now. And so she just.
That's because you prayed for her.
That's exactly right, And, she's just, it's just amazing to see what God's done and how well we fit together, even though we came from such different places,
Yeah, well, yeah, because you really grew up in a good home.
Yeah, I did.
With physical limitations.
Yeah.
That obviously your dad was not going to have.
That's right.
And then she comes from a completely different set of circumstances.
Yeah, completely. And as a matter of fact, it was such a shock to me because I knew there were people that were a little bit poor in America. Like yeah, there's people that's got money and people that don't have money. But I never knew that there are people in America that don't have food to eat 3 times a day. Like you might go a couple days without eating food. I didn't know that existed until I got around Sonia and around her family. And I remember we went down for a wedding shower. We get there at 5, 6 o'clock in the evening. We don't eat anything for supper, and I'm like, well, maybe they eat early. We missed it. So we get up, no breakfast. They eat breakfast. Okay, maybe they don't eat breakfast. So we get to lunch, no lunch, and finally I asked Sonia, I said, hey, do people eat in Odessa? Like, what's up? And she said, well, there's probably no food here.
Wow.
And I'm like, no food? There's like 6 kids here and people. No food. So we went and got bologna and hot dogs and had something to eat. But I was just like, what? Like, literally no food?
Yeah.
And that just was just an eye opener that somebody would grow up in that kind of a situation. Now, before her dad got hurt, they were fine, just a fine middle class family that just like me, everything was great. But when her dad got hurt, it just sent her mom into this spiral, this vortex of not knowing what to do. And that's what spun them into such deep poverty. I'm talking about, like, people will tell you they're poor, but they're not really poor. I mean, Sonia grew up like serious poor, which was really good when we first got married because we didn't have any money, and she could squeeze the life out of a $5 bill. Man, so.
How did you feel called to preach pastor? I mean, that.
Well, I would have never picked pastor because I had been in support staff for pastors all my ministry. And I thought, I'm never doing that job. That job is for the birds. I'll stay with the kids, stay with the youth, let these guys handle things. And so I never wanted to be a pastor ever. And I didn't want to do anything. I just wanted to be around Jesus and Jesus people. And that was my prayer at that camp that Frank took me to. I literally felt like nothing. Like I didn't have anything to offer anybody. When you get down past the fake facade, and you really down deep in here, I was like, what can I do? How can I help anybody? How can I do anything? And that was my prayer at that camp. Lord, I feel like nothing. I am nothing. I ain't got nothing to offer you. But if you can use nothing, whatever you want me to do, I'll be happy to do that. So I started setting up the chairs, because these chairs all connect together. So if I had one row set up, I could lean against the row and set up the next row. Kind of in reverse order type thing. And that was my first job in the church, and I was thrilled to do it, And then they would start asking me, I just share in a small group setting or whatever. Once again, Frank said, man, you might could like talk. Why don't you share this week at the youth meeting, And that's how it started. And I was a singer. My dad was a bouncer. I told you that. So I was a singer, and I started singing when I was 6 years old. My mom just kind of heard me in a bathtub, I guess, and thought he might have a voice. So I started singing at different things and churches. And so my dad was a bouncer at the bars, and so he would here and there get me hooked up with these bands in the bars, and I'd sing in these bars and clubs, as a little bitty kid.
Wow.
And sing country music and do all this other stuff. And then, so I do a little bit of worship, sing some praise and worship at church, and sing specials at churches, and travel around, sing. And then, Frank thought, you might could talk too. And I'm like, oh no, I don't talk, I sing, I'm a singer. And then he talked me into, just kind of getting into talking and speaking. And it just kind of took off. And so I was doing youth and children and bus ministry at a church there in Borger. And this church here in Wheeler called my pastor, said, hey, we're struggling. Can you come help us? My pastor said, hey, would you come with me and help me do some music and some singing and do some worship and maybe, cover some services? I said, yeah, I'll come. And we'd been coming down for a while, and it was the day after Thanksgiving. And when we came one Sunday, I remember we came one Sunday, and it was so funny because I thought, what in the world, because this is a little bitty town. And back in those days, it was the Honey Inn. And I can still remember the little motel. You couldn't call. They didn't have the phones that you could call. You picked the phone up, and it would ring the front desk of the hotel, and then the hotel would dial whatever number it is that you want to call out. I thought, this is just like Mayberry. because I'm a Mayberry fan, Andy Griffith. Hey, Sarah, get me the grocery store. You know what I mean? And I thought, this is the place, and so I loved it, right? And so we're leaving town after we preached that Sunday. And Sonia said, can you ever see us moving to this town and being a pastor here at this church? I said, oh, no way. I said, I love it, and I'll come anytime they want me to come, but I'm not ever going to be a pastor. That's not for me. I'm not going to do it here, and I'm not going to do it anywhere. That's not going to happen. Yeah. And she's like, okay. And so we'd go on a couple years or a year, and we're coming down Sunday nights and doing some meetings with our pastor, and if he can't make it, I come by myself, and we do services. And the day after Thanksgiving, after we've been coming a year, I just felt like the Lord just kind of laid on my heart, hey, I want you to move over there and pastor that church. And so I'm like, oh, man. So I grab a notebook and I call my pastor, and I'm writing in this notebook the things that the Lord's laying on my heart. And Sonia is in there cleaning up, doing dishes, whatever, and she comes in, sees me laying on the living room floor. And I'm kind of laying on the floor with one hand holding the phone, the other hand on my forehead, like, what is all this? So I call my pastor, and I'm talking to my pastor about it, and he said, oh, yeah. He said, I knew from the first time they called us that you're going to be the pastor of that church. Yeah. And so Sonia, she sees me, she leans down in this ear, and she whispers in my ear, and she says, we're moving to Wheeler, aren't we? so I'm like, get out of here, because that was just not what I would have picked. I would have picked any other job in the church than to be the pastor, honestly. And I thought, gosh, what are you talking? What are we doing here? But I knew the Lord had told me to do it. So that was my prayer. Lord, if you can use nothing, whatever you tell me to do, I don't care what it is. If you tell me to do it, I'll do it. And so I had backed myself into a corner. I had no recourse other than to say yes to the Lord. And here we are, fixing to be 21 years.
Yeah, 21
in
years
Wheeler,
of using nothing.
Using nothing, that's right, for sure. That's still pretty close.
Oh, no.
It's still pretty close to this day. I'm like, how did I get here? But it's all the Lord, I don't have. Finally, the Lord found a way to bring enough healing into my life where I realized I could be who I am. I didn't have to be my dad. I looked up to my dad so much I wanted to be the tough guy, which I didn't like to fight because I was only going to get one punch in before the fight was over, right? So even if I was lucky, so I wasn't much of a fighter, but I just thought, you know what? I'm just going to be me. I'm just going to be me and let God do with whatever it is He can do with that,
And you've funny stories. You've been accused of faking it.
Oh yeah, I've been accused of being drunk. Been accused of faking it. I've been all this stuff. Just last week. I was standing in the Dollar General store right up here in Wheeler, and I didn't realize it, but Sonia was in there talking and everything, so I'm leaning on a display of Keystone beer. And I'm just leaning on this display of Keystone beer, and this fellow walks up, and it's right in the door, just walks up and he says, hey, Pastor, you gonna get any of that beer? And I said, no, it makes me walk straight. I can't drink a drop. And so he thought that was funny. If I drink, you'll know I'm drunk if I walk perfectly straight, And so anyway, he thought that was funny. And so I've always had those situations where people, because I can speak well, I'm well spoken, I seem fine, they don't initially they think I'm kidding around, they think I'm joking. We took my son Blaze to the Scottish Rite Hospital for his toe walking, and he walked on his toes as a baby. We got concerned about it, and that's where I had my surgeries, all my rehab. So we're in there talking about Blaze, and the lady's looking up on the computer, and it says, "Hey, you're a former patient here." And I said, "Yeah, I was a patient here when I was his age." And she says, "It says here you have cerebral palsy." I said, "Yes, ma'am, that's correct." And I've just been sitting in a chair like I am right here. And he said, "And you got a definite diagnosis from a doctor?" I said, "Yeah, I'm pretty sure they're correct." Yeah, you know what I mean? Because it doesn't seem right. It just doesn't seem right. And so, pretty often people are they're finding it hard to believe if I'm just sitting here and you can't tell that I have cerebral palsy. One of my favorite stories is we're coming into Walmart. A lady's walking out of Walmart. And she just stops me and says, she says, "You just inspire me." And she just grabs me and hugs me. And so I said, "I inspire you?" And she says, "Oh, yeah, you're so inspiring." And I said, "Why?" And she said, well, you're out here living your life and, just enjoying your life. And I'm just inspired by that. And I said, well, thank you very much. I said, now me and my wife, we're going to go in here in Walmart. We're going to rob the place blind. But I appreciate you saying that I'm inspiring. And she steps back like, what? And I said, oh, I'm just kidding. We're not really. And I hugged her and thanked her. But that happens really regular, right? That things like that happen. And another funny story that we talk about, and I don't know if I've told you this one or not, but we were youth pastors. Okay, so we worked all day long. Sonia worked at her job. I worked at my job. So I'm working my secular job. Sonia's working her secular job. And we decided we're going to go to Santa Fe for just a little weekend getaway. So we work, right? And that night, this is like a Wednesday or Thursday, we get off work and we get a call from one of our youth that doesn't really have any family. She's just kind of making it on her own. She's had a appendix rupture. So we go to the hospital. We go with her. We're up all night at the hospital with her with this appendicitis. We go back the next day and we work all day again. And then after work, we leave for Santa Fe. And in those days, we didn't have a car that would go anywhere. We were just driving these old junkers. And the best car we had at our disposal was my dad's 77 Lincoln Continental.
Oh, what's that?
That was a big old boat we're driving, and man, that steering was loose, and he just got back from New Orleans Mardi Gras. We got all these Mardi Gras beads hanging from the mirror, and we're tired, and I drive with a hand control, so I can't drive anything that doesn't have a hand control on it. And Sonia's driving, she's getting tired. We're just right outside of Santa Fe, we get pulled over.
Oh,
in this big Lincoln Continental. The guy comes up to the window already. He's got the breathalyzer in his hand and the clipboard in his hand. He knows that we're fixing to have us a drunk driving situation. So she rolls down the window and he says, ma'am, he said, you're all over the road out here. He said, yeah, you been drinking tonight? And Sonia says, no, sir, we don't drink. We're Christians. We don't drink a drop. And she said, well, your eyes look pretty red. I'm going to have you step out of the car. And she's trying to explain, no, we had a youth that's in there, and we've been up a couple nights, and we hadn't had much sleep. And, she's going through this process. And then before we know it, 2 other cars come up, and they got the whole thing lit up with their big lights, on top of the car. And they're fixing to give Sonia this field sobriety test. And I'm like, we are in trouble because they're going to get Sonia. They're going to lock her up. And put her in the cuffs. Then they're going to get me out and try to get me to walk a straight line. And everybody's going to jail tonight. It's all over with. Nobody's getting out of this thing. And so finally, she says, do you mind if I look in your trunk? And so, no, you look in the trunk. So Sonia pops the trunk open, and on top of our suitcase, she just happened to throw her Bible in there. And so she sees the Bible, and I hear her pick it up. See, look, this is the Bible. This is my Bible. We're Christians. We don't drink. And so the policeman followed us all the way into our hotel where we pulled in. But that was one of the nights I thought, yeah, we're all going to jail. And he's not going to ever believe I got cerebral. Yeah, right, son. Turn around, put your hands on the car. Nobody's getting out of this deal. So we always think that's always a funny story. I'm like, man, because he's going to ask me, can you drive this car home? I'm going to say, no, but it's not because I'm drinking. Oh, sure, sir. So anyway.
I guess, you're talking about going as if people don't recognize your handicap.
Yeah.
Because I guess you don't wear it well.
Yeah.
And that's a compliment in regards that I think in your relationship with God, the joy of the Lord shines brighter than any physical limitations.
Yeah.
And I guess that's what to me, I'm sitting here listening, I'm thinking, what a beautiful thing, because for me, personally, I think, wow, all of us have some type of weakness, some type of, we all do. And all of us really are handicapped. We are, and maybe whether it's physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, whatever. And I think that's the strength of the joy of the Lord, is that it really just just nothing can put that out.
Yeah. Well, I think that's such a good point. Everybody does have a handicap. Some people's are plainly seen. Most people's are not. And the thing about that is are you going to identify with that disability? Whatever that disability is, are you going to identify with that? Sonia came up with this deal, and I've thought about getting a T-shirt. If you put go in front of disability, it's God's ability. So don't worry about what you can't do. Don't worry about what's broken in you. Just go. And when you go, in your disability, whatever it may be, if you go in that, then all of a sudden it becomes God's ability. And so that's what we're looking for.